Before I begin, you should follow me on Twitter at Prevails. Why? Well, YouTube demonetized my last video claiming I said the most naughtiest of words when I didn't. And the only way I was able to get them to fix it, and they did, was by tweeting at them with the help of my Twitter followers who liked and retweeted it. Oh, and I made some cool book announcements and complained about my internet being terrible. Anyway, today I've got some scary, wicked camping stories to share with you, 2 of which I've added to my best of 2022 list. Can you guess which 2 I enjoyed the most in this episode? As usual, don't forget to send me your scary stories so I can narrate them at darkstories.org. And check out eeriecast.com to enjoy this show as a podcast or listen to other scary shows like it. Now, let's begin. My great-grandmother's 18th century horror story. From John 343. When many of us think of the 1800s, we tend to think of those cheesy rhinestone cowboy TV shows. We don't consider just how terrifying it truly was to be alive at the time. I was born in 1959. I didn't meet my great-grandmother until I was around 7, so it would have been 1966, I believe. My great-grandmother, who at the time was around 1998, was a very sweet and kind little old lady. She dressed the way that I had seen people dress on Bonanza. So for a young child, a boy especially, who was obsessed with stories of the Wild West that I'd seen on TV, I was excited to flood her with questions. At first, she told me all these wondrous stories of covered wagons, cowboy standoffs, building everything you owned, and just general stories of living in a mostly lawless time. At the time, it was the middle of summer, and my mother had told me to take my dog out to the backyard so he could use the facilities and we could get settled in for the night. Within a few seconds of my mother saying this, my great-grandmother jumped to her feet from her chair and screamed, "No, don't let him go out there." My grandmother walked over to my great-grandmother, putting a hand on her shoulder and whispering something in her ear to settle her down. This was kind of alarming to me, because I didn't really know this woman too well. But being a silly kid, I wrote it off and took Rowdy out to the backyard. When I got back in and locked up, the mood had completely changed. Even though I was going to be allowed to stay up later than normal, my mom told me to take Rowdy and go to bed with him. I questioned her and asked what was going on. I could clearly see my great-grandmother was very disturbed in the other room. My mother said, "Jacob, just go to bed." I was not familiar with her carrying that tone towards me. I laid down after putting my pajamas on and just stared at the ceiling, not really being able to sleep. I headed downstairs to grab a glass of milk, trying to slip a few of the sweets my mother, aunts, and grandmother had made. That's when I saw my great-grandmother sitting there staring out the back window. I asked her, "Grandma Caroline, is everything okay?" She turned around and looked at me, saying, "Do you want to know why I didn't want you to go outside?" I answered, "Yes, please." Believing I was about to hear another Wild West story, I grabbed my sweets cautiously, not knowing what she would say, and sat down for a story. She said, "The reason I didn't want you to go outside is because I didn't want him to get you. I've seen it twice since I've been here, and I won't let it happen again." "What are you talking about, Grandma Caroline?" "The black haint in the woods." "What's a haint?" "Honestly, it can mean a lot of things, but at its core, it means something evil." She went on to explain this story to me. "When I was 17 in 1885, I saw it for the first time. My daddy, who was a Civil War veteran, decided to take me, my sisters, and my mama on a little bit of a trip to meet some men he had served with in the war. We would have to set up a camp a couple of times along the way, but we didn't care, because we were too caught up in the excitement of the whole thing. It was in the middle of summer, so we let Mama and Daddy have the tent. Me and my sister slept on blankets and looked up at the stars, just dreaming. On the second night, whenever we were settling in for camp, a family of travelers on their way through the area stopped by, asking if they could share the area for their camp. My daddy was a really good judge of character, and he didn't sense anything wrong. So he said yes, just keep to your own. They made their camp quickly and were asleep almost as fast. I woke up late in the night to see the youngest boy of the group walking towards the woods. At first, I couldn't tell what he was walking towards, but I knew he didn't need to be up and about. I quickly lit a small lantern to run after him and see what was going on, almost afraid I was going to catch him peeing out by the wood line. And that's when I seen it. A tall, dark man with a long trench coat and big hat, like the men that we would see coming through town from time to time, looking to pick a fight or start some trouble. At first, I thought it was a real man and told him to mind his own. Then he looked at me, and that's when I knew this was something evil. His eyes were bright white, and when he smiled, his mouth protruded a bright steam that shouldn't have been coming out of his mouth in the middle of a summer. Before I could even react, he had grabbed the boy, and he was gone. I fainted there. I came to the next morning during a search to find the boy. He was gone, and no one ever found him. I told my daddy about everything that happened. He told me to forget about it, that we were going home right away. I couldn't make sense of anything that happened. After we got home very late the next night, my daddy told us all straight to bed. I tried to lay there and sleep, but couldn't get it off my mind. Then I heard something rustling in the woods. I looked out my window, and I seen it again. That coal-black son of a gun with those white eyes looking directly at me. I rubbed my eyes several times to try to make sure I was awake, and he was still there. I then ran to my mama and daddy's room to get my daddy, and he was gone. But then I noticed the front door was open. I walked to the open door and seen my daddy sitting on the porch with a mouthful of tobacco and a shotgun in his hand. He said to me, "I know what you're seeing, and I've seen it too. It followed me home after the war. I don't know what the heck it is. It's been here for years, baby girl. Go inside. Don't worry about it." I told him I couldn't do that. I decided to sit there next to him. This godless thing stared at us all night, before eventually turning and walking back into the woods before the sun broke. We would sit and watch it, just me and Daddy, almost every night for months, when all of a sudden, he just stopped appearing. Not long after, I met your great-granddaddy, got married, and moved away. I didn't see the man again till the night that your great-great-granddaddy died. He was lying on his deathbed at his and Mama's house. I looked out the window, and just as sure as I was standing there, he was there again. After Daddy died, I didn't see the man again until the night that we pulled up in your driveway. I saw him standing in the bushes beside your house. I don't know what he is, Jacob, and I don't know what he wants. So just make sure you stay in the house after dark, and keep that darn dog in the house too. Needless to say, as of this point, I was far too afraid to go back to sleep. So I just held Rowdy as tight as I could and lay there. The next morning, on little to no sleep, I walked down the stairs to find Great-Grandma Caroline and everybody else laughing and joking as if nothing had ever happened. When I questioned my Great-Grandma Caroline about the conversation that she and I had the night before, she said to me, "I'm sorry, honey. I don't know what you're talking about." But then, a few moments later, she looked at me with a very distinct look and gave me a wink. The rest of Grandma Caroline's visit was uneventful. She left 2 days later, and although she would live to be 102 years old, that was the first and only time I would ever see her. To this day, I find myself looking into the dark to try and see if I can catch a glimpse of whatever this thing is, and I never have. maybe that's for the best, considering that this thing followed my great-great-grandfather home after the Civil War. I don't want to see it. War is full of death, destruction, and carnage in every way that you could imagine. So I think it kind of goes without saying that war leaves a stain on those who are around it. The Civil War was truly a dark time in American history, and we tend to not want to talk about it too often. We forget the sheer brutality that was fueling this war. Although great-grandma Caroline died peacefully in her home, my Aunt Whitney said her last words were, "I see him standing there." His Guardian Angel, from Bubbleguppy. Ghosts aren't always malefic. Some are downright kind and gentle, just like the one from this experience. This was one of the last times I went camping. It was with my cousin, his girlfriend, and my boyfriend. My cousin is 39, but he was always my favorite, because he always went out of his way for me. For this to make sense, I need to tell you about my former roommate as well. Her name was Alice. She and my cousin were always so sweet together. He was 33 back then, and me and my roommate were both 22 then. Alice and my cousin always joked around with each other, like throwing cold water over her when she was taking a shower, or Alice hiding somewhere and scaring my cousin. But when we'd all watch a movie, Alice would always sit next to him and put her head on his shoulder. Now, my cousin is peculiar when it comes to people putting their head on his shoulder, so you can tell he really cares about someone if he lets them do that. One day we heard that Alice was in a terrible accident. She was taken to the hospital. When we arrived there, her family was sitting in the hallway, and the doctor asked if we were Gabby and Russell, and we answered yes. The doctor said, "She won't make it long, so please make it short." When we finally saw Alice, it felt as if my heart stopped. She was wired to so many machines. Alice smiled though, and stuck out her hand, grabbing Russell's. He sat next to the bed on the stool. I walked to the edge of the bed. She said, "I love you, Gabs," then turned her head to Russell, to which she then grabbed her bracelet, took it off, and put it in Russell's hand, saying, "I love you so much. I wish we could have been together, but I'll always be with you." She ended up passing away right in front of our eyes not too long after. My cousin Russell wears that bracelet every day and only takes it off when taking a shower or a bath or when he goes swimming. He even got a tattoo of Alice's name with angel wings on his right pec on his chest. Fast forward 3 years, my cousin Russell finally had a girlfriend after the death of Alice. Eloise and Russell were an official couple for 3 months at the time, and my boyfriend Eddie and I were together for a full year then. Eddie wanted to go camping with me, and I suggested Russell and Eloise come with us. After all, Eddie and Russell are like 2 peas in a pod when they're together. He of course said yes. The next day, Eloise and Russell showed up with camping equipment. We went to the biggest forest nearby, setting up tents. Then Eddie and Russell began looking for big rocks and wood to make a fire pit. Eloise and I could hear them joking around while looking for the required items. Then Eloise said, "So has Eddie asked you yet?" It was clear that Russell told Eloise that I wanted to get married pretty soon, but before I could answer, Eddie and Russell came back. "Eloise, did you know your boyfriend's crazy?" Eddie said. We saw Russell holding a big pile of rocks. Eloise looked at Russell with a face that just said sarcastically, "Really?" and he dropped the rocks on the ground. As Eloise stood up, Russell walked to her and just kissed her. Eloise then said to me, "Okay, I won't say anything." Later on, Russell cooked the food they'd brought. We sat on the ground starting to tell each other scary stories. After the stories, we went to bed, but since those scary stories tended to get under my skin, I had a bit of trouble sleeping. Those kinds of stories tend to make me kind of paranoid, and I start wondering about things that might happen. Eddie slept with me, and that did help me feel better. He told me not to worry, and I answered back with an "I love you." The next day, I was the first to awake, or at least I thought I was. Eloise then woke up and asked me, "Good morning, have you seen Russell?" No, I thought I was the first one to wake up, to be honest, I replied. I looked around to see if Russell was anywhere, but I didn't see him. We went on with our morning, assuming that he would come back at some point. But a few hours passed, and I could see Eloise was beginning to get restless. Where could he be? She said, worried. I tried to comfort her, saying he probably went out and maybe fell asleep somewhere. She managed to smile, but anyone could see that it was fake. More hours passed, and Eloise finally decided to call the cops. Eventually, a search party was formed. The cops allowed the three of us to join in. A few hours into the search, I saw something glinting in the little sunlight that still shined. I ran up to it and saw it was the bracelet that Alice had given Russell. My heart was pounding. I heard an officer then shout my name, and I put the bracelet into my pocket. Ma'am, we're gonna have to stop the search now. It's gonna be dark soon, and tomorrow we'll come with the dogs to find him, the officer explained. My heart sank. I was so scared of what could have happened to my cousin. When I arrived back at the campsite, I found Eddie trying to calm Eloise down. She was crying. She never stopped crying until she fell asleep that night. Eddie and I lay in our tent. Then Eddie said to me, "We'll find him, okay? I'm sure he's fine wherever he is." I lay on my back trying to fall asleep, but it was soon clear that I wouldn't be sleeping that night. Eddie was fast asleep though, and I could hear the slight snoring of Eloise coming from the tent next to ours. I picked up the bracelet and held it up, whispering, "Where are you, Russell?" No sooner did I say that, I heard what sounded like a whisper on the wind. I could have swore I heard the words, "Follow me." I got up suddenly and called out, "Hello?" I didn't hear any response, but I did feel the bracelet hit the side of my hand, which was weird since I hadn't moved or touched it, and there was no wind coming through the tent. Then I swear I heard it again. "Follow me." I threw on some clothes, opened up the tent, and stepped out. Then I froze. There was a figure standing in the distance. At that distance, I could not see any features, but I took a step forward, and at this, that figure took a step back, but I didn't hear any footsteps. Once again, I stepped forward, and same as before, the figure stepped back. I gathered my courage and called out, "Who are you?" But I didn't hear a voice in response. Something else happened instead. The bracelet hit the back of my leg, which surprised me. I grabbed the bracelet off the ground. That's when another windy whisper came. "Trust me." My mind was blown. I wasn't sure if it was even real, what I was hearing. Alice had always said that to me when I was afraid. My mouth agape, I then swallowed and gathered my courage again. I spoke. "Alice, is that you?" Then I heard a giggle, and I smiled when that giggle sounded familiar. There was no mistaking it. That had to be Alice. Was she here to help? I began walking toward the figure, which I was now sure was my darling departed friend, Alice. I followed her, trying to ask her questions like, "Where are you taking me?" But all I got was giggles, until she stood still, and so did I. "Come," I heard her voice say. Steadily, I walked up closer to the figure, and as I drew closer, it became clear to me, this figure truly was Alice. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, seeing her standing in front of me after all this time. She then turned her face to the left. "There," she said. I walked over to where she was looking. After a few steps, I noticed a hole in the ground. I shouted, "Hello," into the hole. Suddenly, I was greeted by another familiar voice. "Gabs, is that you?" I was both relieved and startled. I shouted back, "My God, Russell, are you okay? What happened?" He replied, "I fell down here, hurt my ankle pretty bad. I can't even stand on it, but you need to help me out of this hole." I put the bracelet into my pocket, putting my hand into the hole. Russell was just barely able to reach it, and I managed to help Russell out of the hole. He looked at me, and he asked, "How did you find me, Gabs?" I grabbed the bracelet out of my pocket, showing it to him. "Guess who?" He smiled and said, "It was Alice?" I smiled back. "I think so. I think I saw her, and she led me to you." Suddenly, a gentle breeze picked up only for a moment, and I heard what sounded like, "I love you." I turned to Russell, asking, "Did you hear that?" He was smiling, just looking right in front of him. We walked back to the campsite as I supported him on his hurt ankle. Halfway there, the sun began to rise. I asked, "How did you even end up in that hole?" "Well, I was picking up wood to start the breakfast fire. I ran into a boar of all things. I just started running away from it blindly." I looked him straight in the eye, and he put on his "I did something stupid" smile and continued. "The boar chased me. I was zigzagging through the trees, but it kept on running after me. I ran through a few branches. That's probably how I lost the bracelet in the first place. I just kept running." A big ray of early morning sunlight was now shining through the trees, creating a breathtaking scene in front of us. Russell and I just sighed, looking at each other. I smiled and hugged him. Then Russell said, "Alice loved to see the sunlight through the trees like this so much." Then one final time, the whisper on the wind came to us, "Thank you." The two of us quickly turned around, and we saw her standing there, looking back at us. Then we heard Eloise shout behind us. We turned to her and saw her running at us. She threw her arms around Russell, crying her eyes out. Eddie hugged me, saying, "My God, where were you? And where'd you find him?" We told them how I found Russell, except for the parts where Alice helped. To this day, Russell still wears the bracelet, and even calls his first daughter, who is now 1 year and 7 months old, Alice. When she's old enough, Russell's going to have his daughter wear the bracelet, and have Alice be her guardian angel. Campfire Creatures from Quinn. Back in high school, me and some friends decided to go camping late at night without our parents' permission. When they'd first mentioned to me that they wanted to go, something seemed off about my friends' possible intentions. Just to let you know, my friends were not particularly religious people. They'd tried to perform many rituals in the school bathroom, but were soon caught due to publicity. Their parents, though, were strangely strict Catholics, and fortunately had never found out about their children's behaviors. Now back to the story. On a Friday night, me and my 4 friends snuck out at a sleepover to go to the nearby woods. They tried to hide it from me, but it was very obvious they brought stuff to start a cult. You know, some ritualistic kind of stuff. I didn't mind it at first, though. I could have always went to take a leak while they did this. Once we arrived in the circle of trees, they got out the salt and the candles. I excused myself abruptly, starting in a random direction, but before I could take even 2 steps away, I felt 2 pairs of hands grab me by the waist and pull me back. I looked behind me to see my 4 friends, all grinning while dragging me toward the fire. I screamed, thrashed around to break free, but their grips were too tight. Before I knew it, I felt the heat surrounding my entire body. As I thought I was about to die, my friends suddenly became weak and loosened their grips. Even though I was held over the fire, I managed to flee and made it about 8 feet away from there before turning around and seeing no one. It was as if my supposed friends had just vanished. I have no idea what happened. Was it actually them? Was it a prank? Who knows? I sure don't. What was outside my tent? From Veronica W. I'm a 17-year-old girl living in southeast Pennsylvania, but this happened just last summer while I was 16. I'd gotten a job at a scout summer camp, and I'd already worked there for 2 weeks. One night I'd been chilling with a friend, let's call him Will, when someone walked past and told him, "Hey, I saw the Wendigo tonight." I glanced at Will. What's he mean? Will looked at me. It's supposedly this creature that's been spotted a few times over at the OA village. It's about 9 to 10 feet tall, covered in some type of white fur. Almost looks like some kind of bipedal deer man thing. They say it runs real fast too. People who have seen it usually run away, but the thing ends up just running into the woods. It's like it's afraid of people. I was pretty sure this was a joke that the older staff told, because the way the other guy casually walked up and talked about it. But I'm easily scared and I didn't dare go to my tent alone. The female staff campsite was the closest to the sighting spot, but I soon forgot about it as we moved into camper week 4. It was the first night of week 4 that things happened. My troop had said goodnight, and each went to their tent. My tent was on a trail leading out of the campsite, and farthest from the group. I fell asleep, and I stayed asleep for a few hours. But then I awoke, and all I could hear was this steady breathing sound, as if something had sat down next to me just outside the tent. I stiffened, panic filling my mind. I dared not move, otherwise I'd risk alerting it. But I wanted the adults nearby to help. I didn't know what to do. I even held my breath, making sure that I wasn't just hearing myself. But it was still there. Forcing myself to stay awake, nearly drifting in and out of consciousness, I waited till sunrise, and that thing stayed there until morning. When I stopped hearing it breathing, I waited for the others to wake up. Then I pulled on my clothes and dashed out of the tent. They were surprised to see me as one of the first up. I recalled what happened to another scout, who told me, "Well, I had to use the bathroom last night. My mom came with me, and when we walked by your tent, we both heard a noise on the way back." My heart sank. I asked, "Did you investigate?" They shook their heads. I knew I couldn't sleep in that tent again, so I moved into my dad's equipment tent. Nothing else happened until week 6. I was with the staff again, and I enjoyed staying up talking to Will. But soon we walked to the bathrooms and parted ways. I'd usually find another girl going to the campsite, but that night I didn't. Nervously, I put my earbuds in, playing some music that made me feel brave. I traveled down the hill and glanced over at a climbing tower nearby. Its floodlight illuminated a rather large shape. This shape was backlit and hunched over, walking towards the shooting range. The shape was like a giant beetle. I could see that it had fur. It was on all fours, and it was about 5 feet tall. I could tell because the fence behind it was the same height. Panicking, I froze, watching this thing walking away from me. Once I couldn't discern its shape anymore, I sprinted to my tent. This time no one believed me that the creature they joked about I saw. Granted, I hadn't seen it very well. They tried to reassure me that it was just someone else. I was on edge the rest of the time I was at the camp. Since that day, I've been researching what creature it is. The closest I've gotten to is a werewolf, but it's still not exact. I'm going back there this year to find out more, and hopefully I don't die for knowing too much. Thank you for listening to another unsettling episode of Unexplained Encounters. You can send us your story to have it narrated on the show at darkstories.org. Unexplained Encounters is an EerieCast original series. You can find other horror-themed podcasts at eeriecast.com, such as Redwood Bureau, a fictional anthology series, Freaky Folklore, a documentary-style series about myths and cryptids around the world, Destination Terror, a show about the most haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, another show I host all about the scary things that happen to people at work. Again, that's eeriecast.com. By the way, if you want fewer annoying ads and you want to support what we do, consider going to eeriecast.com/plus to sign up for EerieCast Plus. That unlocks all our podcasts with all but host-read ads removed. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.